Vinicius grew up in São Gonçalo, a neighborhood full of grit and tight-knit families just outside Rio de Janeiro. He was a kid with a big smile, quick feet, and dreams even bigger than his small town. His family didn't have much, but he knew they'd give anything to see him succeed. The soccer field was where Vinicius felt the world made sense. No worries, no limits, just him and the ball. By the time he was 8, he was already the neighborhood's little superstar, and the local community gathered around to watch him play. His dad, always his biggest fan, noticed Vinicius's potential early on. Working double shifts, his father would still find time to take him to matches across Rio, hoping that one day, the right person would see him play. That day came sooner than they'd expected. A scout from a local club noticed the young boy's lightning speed, his instinct to anticipate moves before they happened, and a natural gift for dribbling past opponents like a seasoned pro. Joining the youth squad at Flamengo, one of the most respected teams in Brazil, was the start of Vinicius's journey into professional soccer. He was just a boy, but in his heart, he knew this was the path to everything he'd ever dreamed of. Training was hard, especially balancing school and family time, but he loved it. The challenges only fueled him, and he always looked forward to the next game, the next goal. As he grew, he faced whispers and taunts, especially from players who didn't take kindly to his growing fame. And then came the first encounter with racism. Nothing big, just offhand comments from rival players who saw him as just another black kid from the favela. But to Vinicius, those words stung. He brushed them off, determined to keep going, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to pull him down. By 17, Vinicius was no longer just a promising player. He was a rising star, catching the eyes of international scouts. But behind the cheers, the ugly comments only grew. Some mocked his accent, his background, his dark skin. He didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of the racism he'd face on his journey. Still, he wouldn't let it hold him back. Then came the call he'd dreamed about, a contract with one of Europe's biggest clubs. Real Madrid wanted him. The offer was a dream come true, a chance to take his talent to the world stage. There were tears, hugs, and promises from his family as he prepared to leave São Gonçalo. He was nervous about leaving, but as he packed his bags, Vinicius made a silent promise to his family and himself, to make them proud no matter what. With a mix of excitement and fear, he boarded the plane to Spain, his heart full of hope. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He'd face it all head-on, just like he always had. Landing in Madrid felt like stepping into another world for Vinicius. The vibrant energy of the city enveloped him as he stepped off the plane, and everything around him was a whirlwind of sights and sounds. The architecture was stunning, and the smell of churros and fresh bread wafted through the air. This was a city filled with history and passion, a place where soccer was more than just a sport. It was a way of life. As he exited the airport, Vinicius could hardly contain his excitement. He was finally in Spain, ready to chase his dreams. As he traveled to the club, Vinicius felt the weight of expectation on his shoulders. His new home, Real Madrid, was one of the most prestigious clubs in the world. Walking through the legendary halls of the Santiago Bernabéu Stadium, lined with trophies and photographs of soccer legends, made his heart race. He had watched videos of these greats as a child, and now he was here, ready to carve out his own legacy. He could almost hear the cheers of fans who believed in him, and it filled him with determination. His first few training sessions were intense. The pace was faster, and the competition was fiercer than anything he had experienced back in Brazil. Every touch of the ball, every pass, every sprint was scrutinized. But Vinicius thrived on the challenge. He was not just a kid from São Gonçalo anymore. He was becoming a professional athlete, a member of a team filled with world-class players. The thrill of it all made him push harder. and he found himself quickly adapting to the demands of the club. During his first matches, he quickly became a fan favorite. Every time he touched the ball, supporters leaned forward in their seats, holding their breath, eager to see what he would do next. His signature moves, his agility, and his knack for scoring goals made people talk. Soon, he had his own chant. Vini, Vini, Vini echoed through the stands, creating a connection between him and the fans. It felt magical. He was living his dream, and every match was an opportunity to showcase his talent on the grandest stage. But amid the cheers, the uglier side of fame began to rear its head. Social media, once a place for connection, became a battleground. Comments from people who didn't know him flooded his profiles, some mocking his accent, others questioning whether he belonged at such a high level. He read them all, trying to brush them off, but the negativity chipped away at his confidence, even if just a little. The real turning point came during a heated match against a rival team. The atmosphere was electric, with both sets of fans shouting and waving flags. But then, amidst the cheers, he heard it, taunts and jeers directed at him. The chants were loud and unmistakable, filled with derogatory language. At first, he thought he misheard, but as he turned to look at the stands, the truth hit him hard. Thousands of people were shouting those words at him. It was as if the joy of the game was sucked away, replaced by a cold reality he had hoped to escape. Vinicius felt his heart race, not from the adrenaline of the match, but from the sting of racism. He had experienced prejudice in Brazil, but this felt different, more public, more pointed. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of those words pressing down on him. But as he looked around, he saw his teammates, the support of the fans who chanted his name, and the love of his family back home. He reminded himself of who he was and why he was there. With renewed determination, Vinicius continued to play. Every dribble, every sprint, and every goal became a statement. He would not be defined by the color of his skin or the hate thrown his way. As he scored a stunning goal that day, the crowd erupted, and in that moment he felt a sense of victory, not just for the team, but for himself. However, he knew this battle was far from over. The incidents didn't stop there. If anything, they grew more frequent. Some media outlets started portraying him as flashy, and commentators spoke about his temperament, as if he was somehow responsible for the hate directed at him. It felt as though the narrative was being twisted, making it harder for him to focus on the game. Each time he walked onto the field, he steeled himself for what could come, but it never dampened his spirit. Vinicius found solace in his teammates and coaches, many of whom recognized the challenges he faced. They did their best to support him, offering words of encouragement and standing by him during difficult times. The club publicly condemned the racist incidents, but the statements felt like mere formalities. Despite their efforts, the chants did not cease. He began to wonder if the system itself was complicit, allowing these things to slide with minimal consequences. Feeling isolated, Vinicius sought out other black players who had experienced similar challenges in their careers. Their stories resonated with him, reminding him he was not alone in this fight. They shared experiences of overcoming adversity, of turning hate into fuel for their passion. "Make them see you," one veteran told him during a candid conversation. "Not for the color of your skin, but for what you can do on the field." Those words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that he had the power to redefine the narrative. Determined to channel his frustration into his performance, Vinicius threw himself into training with even more fervor. Every match became more than just a chance to win. It was an opportunity to show everyone who he was beyond the labels. With every dribble and every goal, he aimed to break through the barriers that society placed on him. And as his skills continued to shine, his name and fame only grew. Through it all, Vinicius kept one goal in mind: He wasn't just here to play. He was here to make a difference. He wanted to show the world that talent knows no color, and he was ready to lead by example. With each passing match, Vinicius found himself at the center of attention, not just from fans, but from the media, club officials, and even rival players. His performances were nothing short of spectacular, and he quickly became the main player for Real Madrid. But with that spotlight came an unbearable weight. He was not just playing for himself. He was carrying the hopes of countless fans who saw him as a symbol of excellence and resilience in the face of adversity. His family watched every game from Brazil, cheering him on and sending messages of encouragement. They knew the struggles he faced and were proud of his achievements, but they also worried about the toll that constant scrutiny and racism could take on him. Vinicius often FaceTimed his mother after games, her face lighting up the screen. "Just remember who you are, Vini," she'd tell him. "You are stronger than they think." As the season progressed, his talent on the pitch became undeniable. He helped lead Real Madrid to yet another Champions League title, his electrifying runs and crucial goals making him the star of the tournament. After the final whistle blew, he found himself in a sea of celebration, surrounded by his teammates who hoisted him into the air. The feeling of triumph washed over him, a moment he had dreamed of since he was a child. But the joy was bittersweet. Even in this moment of glory, he could hear the whispers and the taunts echoing in the back of his mind. Vinicius' success also drew the attention of football's biggest awards. He was nominated for the FIFA Best Player award, and the world began to recognize him as a frontrunner. Fans from all over began campaigning for him to win, filling social media with messages of support. His achievements were a source of pride, not just for him, but for Black athletes everywhere. It was a chance to showcase that talent transcended color, a moment to challenge the status quo. However, the build-up to the awards ceremony was marred by anxiety. As the event approached, he started receiving messages that felt increasingly threatening. Rival fans who had long despised him took to social media to express their hatred, some even going so far as to make threats. At first, he tried to ignore them, telling himself they were just words from people who didn't matter. But the cumulative effect began to weigh heavily on him. The day of the awards ceremony arrived, and Vinicius wore a sharp suit, determined to walk the red carpet with confidence. As he stepped out of the car, he was greeted by a flurry of cameras flashing. The atmosphere was electric, filled with anticipation. Yet, as he smiled for the cameras, he couldn't shake off the feeling that this moment could turn sour. Inside the venue, he saw familiar faces, teammates, legends, and competitors alike. The excitement in the air was palpable. As the award presentations began, Vinicius sat among the nominees, heart racing, waiting to hear his name. When the announcer finally called it, the room erupted in applause. He felt a rush of emotions: relief, pride, hope. This was it, the culmination of all his hard work. But then, as the winners were announced, the unthinkable happened. Instead of his name, the announcer called out the name of a white player who had had a good season, but lacked the impact Vinicius had delivered. The silence that followed was deafening. Vinicius sat frozen, the weight of disappointment crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The backlash was immediate. Social media exploded with reactions, many fans expressing their outrage over the decision, calling it another instance of the systemic racism that plagued football. Vinicius felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and frustration. It wasn't just about the trophy. It was about recognition and respect in a world that often overlooked the contributions of Black athletes. In the following days, Vinicius became a focal point in discussions about racism in football. He was invited to speak on various platforms, sharing his experiences and advocating for change. His story resonated with many, and the support flooded in from fans, players, and even some clubs. He found himself being embraced not just as a player, but as a voice for a generation of athletes facing similar battles. Vinicius understood that the fight against racism was ongoing. He began to partner with organizations dedicated to promoting equality in sports, using his platform to raise awareness. He participated in campaigns and spoke at events, becoming an ambassador for change. He wanted future generations of players to have a better experience, free from the prejudice he faced. As he worked on these initiatives, he also continued to excel on the field. His performances were electrifying, and he became a household name, not just in Spain but around the world. Every time he scored a goal, he would raise his fist in a silent salute, a personal reminder of the struggles he faced and the journey he was on. His resilience inspired many, and with each goal, he felt a little lighter, as if he was shedding the weight of the world one celebration at a time. Despite the hardships, Vinicius was determined to keep pushing forward. He believed that by sharing his story, he could inspire change, not just in football but in society as a whole. With each match, each goal, and each moment in the spotlight, he was proving that talent and hard work could overcome the barriers set before him. As the season drew to a close, Vinicius looked forward to the future with hope. He knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it head-on, armed with the lessons he had learned and the support of those who believed in him. He was more than just a player. He was a symbol of resilience, a warrior on and off the field. As the next season approached, Vinicius found himself at a crossroads. His rise to fame had not only put him in the limelight, but had also intensified the scrutiny he faced, particularly from rival fans. While he had garnered significant support, the shadows of hatred and racism loomed larger than ever. He tried to focus on the positives, his family, friends, and the loyal fans who cheered him on. But the taunts and threats became increasingly hard to ignore, invading even the most joyous moments. The season kicked off with high expectations, and Vinicius felt the pressure. He was now the star player of Real Madrid, and every match seemed to carry an additional weight. During the opening game, as he dribbled the ball down the pitch, the opposing fans unleashed a torrent of abuse. They unfurled banners with derogatory slogans aimed directly at him. At first, he was taken aback, the venom in their voices cutting through the electric atmosphere of the stadium. He tried to block it out, focusing instead on his teammates and the game ahead. Despite the negative energy, Vinicius channeled his frustration into his performance. He scored 2 goals that night, leading Real Madrid to a resounding victory. His celebration was a mix of joy and defiance. He raised his fist again, a silent protest against the hatred. It was a moment of triumph, but also a reminder of the ongoing battle he faced. In the weeks that followed, Vinicius continued to shine on the field. With each match, he became more determined to prove his worth, not just as a player, but as a symbol of resilience. Yet the tension was palpable. Rival fans grew more aggressive, and Vinicius noticed that their chants had escalated from simple insults to threats of violence. The media began to report on the growing animosity, spotlighting the toxic environment surrounding the sport. One evening, after a particularly grueling match, Vinicius received a disturbing message from a fan on social media. It was a direct threat, detailing a plan to confront him at an upcoming match. His heart raced as he read the words, a knot forming in his stomach. He quickly alerted the team's security and shared the message with his coach, who assured him they would take every precaution. But Vinicius couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that crept in. The club organized a press conference to address the issue of racism and threats in football. Vinicius stood beside his teammates, the weight of their collective silence palpable as they faced the cameras. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath, his heart pounding. Football should be a game for everyone, he said, his voice steady. Racism has no place in our sport or in our lives. We must come together to fight this. His words resonated with many, igniting discussions across social media and prompting other players to share their experiences. Vinicius felt a wave of solidarity wash over him, the realization that he was not alone in this fight. Other players began to speak out, and for the first time, it felt like the football community was rallying against racism as a united front. However, as support grew, so did the backlash. The rival fans who had already been harassing him escalated their efforts, launching a campaign of intimidation aimed at both him and his family. They sent hateful messages, vandalized property, and even targeted his loved ones. The situation became increasingly dangerous, and the club ramped up security around Vinicius. But he refused to let fear dictate his actions. One night, after a tough practice, he returned home to find his mother waiting for him. She looked worried, the lines of concern etched across her face. "Vini, you need to be careful," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I hear things from back home, and I don't want anything to happen to you." Vinicius felt a surge of emotions: anger, frustration, and sadness. "I can't back down, Mom. I'm fighting for us, for everyone who has faced this kind of hate. I won't let them win." She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. They embraced tightly, both knowing that the fight ahead would not be easy. As the season continued, Vinicius used the energy from the hatred to fuel his game. He poured every ounce of his determination onto the pitch, scoring goals and making plays that left fans in awe. But the tension lingered. Each match was a battle, not just against the opposing team, but against the very real threat of violence and racism that loomed in the stands. Then came the day of the highly anticipated derby match against their biggest rival. The stakes were high, and the atmosphere was electric. Vinicius could feel the tension as he stepped onto the field, the roar of the crowd mixing with the distant chants of hatred. But he also felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his moment to shine. The match started fiercely, with both teams vying for control. Vinicius was relentless, darting past defenders with ease. He was in his element, showcasing his talent and speed. But as the match progressed, the opposing fans grew more aggressive, unleashing a barrage of insults and threats. The tension in the stadium was thick, and Vinicius felt the weight of their hatred. But he refused to let it break him. With 10 minutes left in the game, the score was tied. Vinicius took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of strength and determination. He maneuvered through the defense, his heart racing as he approached the goal. Time seemed to slow as he unleashed a powerful shot, sending the ball soaring into the net. The stadium erupted in cheers, but the celebration was bittersweet. As he raised his fist once more, the hate-filled chants echoed around him. The final whistle blew, and Real Madrid emerged victorious. Vinicius was flooded with joy and relief, but as he looked around, he realized the fight was far from over. He had won the match, but the war against racism continued. As he left the field, he vowed to keep fighting, both for himself and for all those who faced similar struggles. His journey was just beginning, and he was ready to take it head-on. The week following the intense derby match was filled with a mix of celebrations and rising tensions. Vinicius's performance had made headlines, and his goal was hailed as a symbol of resilience against the backdrop of hate. Yet, as he stepped into the limelight, he found that the recognition came with its own burdens. Everywhere he turned, there were cameras flashing, reporters clamoring for his attention, and fans eager to express their admiration. It was exhilarating, but amid the accolades, the threats loomed larger than ever. He could no longer ignore the messages flooding his social media, each one heavier than the last. The vitriol seemed endless, and he began to feel the weight of being both a star athlete and a symbol of resistance against racism. On a sunny Wednesday morning, Vinicius was invited to a special ceremony at the club's headquarters. It was an event to honor players who had made significant contributions to the team's success over the years. As he arrived, he felt a wave of pride wash over him. This was a moment he had dreamed of since he was a child, kicking a ball around in Brazil. But he was also acutely aware of the eyes on him, the fans, the media, and most importantly, the people who had harassed him. During the ceremony, the atmosphere was celebratory, filled with laughter and camaraderie among players. When it was Vinicius's turn to speak, he took a deep breath, glancing at his teammates beside him. "It's an honor to be recognized for our hard work and dedication," he began, his voice steady. "But it's also important to remember why we play this game. We play for the love of football, for our families, and for everyone who supports us regardless of their background." His words received a warm response, and for a moment, the tension dissipated. However, as he stepped off the stage, the reality of the ongoing battle against racism returned to the forefront of his mind. He could hear rival fans outside the venue chanting insults, their voices carrying on the breeze. It was a stark reminder that while he was being celebrated, there were still those who sought to undermine him. Later that evening, he sat down with his agent, Pedro, to discuss upcoming endorsements and media appearances. Vinicius was eager to use his platform to raise awareness about racism in football, but he was also growing weary of the constant spotlight. "Pedro, I want to make a difference, but I also need to focus on my game," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I can't let this define me. I want my legacy to be about my skills, not just the hate I face." Pedro nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "You're in a unique position, Vini. You have the chance to inspire others. But it's crucial to find a balance. Use your voice, but also protect your peace. You're more than just a player. You're a role model." With those words in mind, Vinicius decided to initiate a campaign against racism in football. He wanted to gather support from fellow players, clubs, and fans. He envisioned a movement that would not only address the toxicity within the sport, but also promote unity and respect among players and supporters. It was ambitious, but Vinicius felt it was necessary. As the campaign began to take shape, Vinicius organized a press conference to unveil his initiative. He wanted to encourage other players to join him in standing up against racism. On the day of the conference, he arrived at the venue, his heart racing with anticipation. The media buzzed around him, eager for answers. Once seated, he opened the floor to questions. "Today, we are here to talk about more than just football," he began, his voice unwavering. "We're here to confront a problem that has plagued our sport for far too long. Racism has no place in football, and it's time for us to take a stand together." As he spoke, he felt a surge of empowerment. The room was filled with players from various teams, all nodding in agreement. It was a moment of solidarity, a united front against hate. Vinicius shared his own experiences, recounting the threats and the pain he had endured. "Together, we can change the narrative," he concluded, his voice echoing in the silence that followed. The response was overwhelming. Players from all corners of the league reached out in support, sharing their own stories of discrimination and abuse. The hashtag #StandWithVinicius began trending on social media, creating a wave of solidarity that rippled through the football community. It felt like a turning point, a moment where voices were finally being heard. However, not everyone was on board. The backlash from certain groups was swift. Some fans felt betrayed, angry that their clubs were aligning with Vinicius and his cause. Rival fans organized protests against him, claiming he was playing the race card. The vitriol online escalated, with threats becoming more explicit and alarming. Despite the growing hostility, Vinicius pressed on. He organized a charity match, inviting players from around the world to participate. The goal was to raise funds for anti-racism initiatives and support victims of discrimination. As the day approached, he felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was more than just a game, it was a statement. On the day of the charity match, the atmosphere was electric. Fans from various teams showed up to support the cause, filling the stands with colorful banners promoting unity. Vinicius felt a sense of hope as he looked around, seeing people come together for a common goal. He took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. When the whistle blew, the match began with an intensity that echoed the cause behind it. Vinicius played with passion, his skill shining as he passed, dribbled, and shot with precision. He scored a stunning goal, and the crowd erupted in cheers. In that moment, he felt like he was playing not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced hatred and discrimination. As the match concluded, the atmosphere shifted from competitive to celebratory. Players and fans united on the pitch, chanting and raising their voices for change. Vinicius stood at the center, his heart swelling with pride. This was the power of football, the ability to bring people together and inspire change. But as he celebrated, a familiar sense of unease crept in. He knew the fight against racism was far from over. The victory on the pitch was just one step in a long journey. He glanced at the banners in the crowd, some with supportive messages while others continued to spread hate. The world outside the stadium was still grappling with prejudice, and he was determined to keep pushing forward. With a newfound sense of purpose, Vinicius vowed to continue his fight. He understood that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready. He was not just a footballer. He was a warrior in the fight for equality, and he would not back down. The weeks following the charity match felt transformative for Vinicius. The support he had received from fans and players alike fueled his determination to combat racism in football. He poured his energy into both his game and the campaign, balancing his time between training sessions and community events. He felt invigorated, ready to face whatever came next. However, as he continued to gain recognition for his efforts, the backlash intensified. Social media became a battleground, with some fans relentless in their hostility. They dug up old videos and photos, attempting to undermine his achievements and paint him as a divisive figure. Vinicius tried not to let it affect him, but the weight of constant scrutiny began to wear him down. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Vinicius returned home to find a barrage of notifications on his phone. Among the usual supportive messages, he stumbled upon a video that sent a chill down his spine. It was a compilation of his highlights, his goals, his assists, his triumphs, overlaid with hateful comments and threats. The culmination of these negative sentiments was jarring, a stark reminder of the prejudice that still existed. As he sat on his couch, staring at the screen, a wave of anger washed over him. He felt the urge to lash out, to respond to the trolls and prove them wrong. But deep down, he knew that reacting in anger wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he decided to channel his emotions into action. The next day, he met with his team to discuss how they could leverage their influence further. "We need to do more," he asserted during their meeting. "We can't just talk about change. We have to be the change." His teammates nodded in agreement, and together, they devised a plan to host a series of workshops aimed at educating young players about racism and promoting diversity within the sport. The first workshop took place at a local youth academy. Vinicius stood in front of a group of aspiring footballers, their eyes wide with admiration. "I want to share my journey with you all," he began, his voice firm yet inviting. "But I also want to hear your stories. Each one of you has the power to make a difference, both on and off the pitch." As the workshop progressed, the young players opened up about their own experiences with discrimination, revealing the pain and confusion they felt. Vinicius listened intently, offering words of encouragement and advice. By the end of the session, he could see a shift in their attitudes, a spark of understanding that they could be allies in the fight against racism. In the following weeks, Vinicius and his teammates conducted several more workshops, reaching hundreds of young players across Spain. The initiative gained traction, and soon, other clubs began to adopt similar programs. The ripple effect of their efforts felt tangible, and Vinicius found renewed strength in the collective impact they were making. However, amid these successes, the underlying tension persisted. Rival fans remained hostile, and during matches, the threats intensified. Vinicius could feel the animosity in the air, especially during away games where rival supporters unleashed their anger. Each taunt and insult felt like a weight on his shoulders, and he often found himself seeking solace in the locker room before matches, trying to clear his mind. One fateful night, as he prepared for a crucial match against a top rival, the tension was palpable. The stadium was packed, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and hostility. Vinicius could hear the rival fans chanting, their voices echoing through the corridors. As he stepped onto the pitch, he felt a mix of adrenaline and anxiety. The match began fiercely, with both teams fighting for dominance. Vinicius played with intensity, weaving through defenders and creating chances for his teammates. Yet, every time he touched the ball, the rival fans unleashed a torrent of boos and insults. It was a test of resilience, and he refused to let their negativity derail him. As the game progressed, tensions flared on the field. A particularly rough tackle from a rival player sent Vinicius sprawling to the ground. The referee blew the whistle, but the rival fans erupted in applause, reveling in the pain of a player they viewed as an enemy. Vinicius felt anger bubble inside him, but he channeled it into his performance. He knew he had to rise above the hatred, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in his cause. In a pivotal moment during the second half, Vinicius found himself in a one-on-one situation with the goalkeeper. He dribbled past the defender with a quick feint and shot towards the goal, the ball sailing into the net. The crowd erupted, but his joy was bittersweet. As he celebrated, he could hear the rival fans' jeers intensifying, their hatred pouring out like venom. Despite the euphoria of scoring, Vinicius knew that this match wasn't just about winning. It was about standing up against the darkness that surrounded him. After the final whistle blew, and his team emerged victorious, he raised his arms in celebration, but his thoughts were consumed by the ongoing battle against racism. As the players exchanged handshakes and hugs, the atmosphere in the stadium shifted. Vinicius noticed a group of young fans holding up a banner that read, "Football is for everyone." It was a simple yet powerful statement, a reminder of the unity he fought for. He took a moment to acknowledge them, waving and smiling as he walked off the pitch. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Vinicius reflected on the match and the challenges ahead. The fight against racism was far from over, and while he had made strides, there was still work to be done. He knew he had to keep pushing forward, not just for himself, but for those who would follow in his footsteps. Determined, he began to plan his next steps. The fight against hatred was a marathon, not a sprint, and he was ready to lead the charge. He envisioned a future where young players could step onto the pitch without fear, where their talent could shine free from prejudice. As he drifted off to sleep, Vinicius felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was daunting, but he was not alone. He had his teammates, his fans, and a community that believed in change. Together, they could challenge the darkness and create a brighter future for football. As the weeks passed, the narrative surrounding Vinicius shifted. His resilience and dedication to fighting racism had garnered media attention beyond football. He became a symbol of hope and resistance, not just for Black players, but for everyone facing discrimination in any form. However, with this spotlight came scrutiny. Every action he took was dissected, and the pressure to maintain his image weighed heavily on him. Vinicius found solace in his training sessions, where he could focus solely on improving his game. He often stayed late, perfecting his free kicks and honing his dribbling skills, hoping to further contribute to his team's success. His teammates rallied around him, offering support and encouragement. They were proud to stand beside him, both on and off the pitch. Yet, as the season progressed, the tension began to escalate. Rivals grew more aggressive, both in their tactics and their taunts. During matches, Vinicius became the target of coordinated attacks, not only from opposing players, but also from fans in the stands. The racist banners became more elaborate and the chants more aggressive. It was clear that the hatred aimed at him was deeply rooted and far from an isolated incident. One evening, after a match where the opposing team had openly mocked him, Vinicius decided to take a stand. He called a press conference, something he had been hesitant to do in the past. But now, he felt an overwhelming need to speak out, to voice the injustices that had plagued him and countless others in the sport. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as he approached the podium. Taking a deep breath, he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "I want to talk about something that goes beyond football," he began, his voice steady. "Racism has no place in our game. It's time for us to unite and create a culture of respect and understanding." He shared his experiences, how he had faced discrimination since his youth in Brazil and how it had only intensified in Spain. Vinicius emphasized that change could not happen without awareness and education. "It starts with us. As players, we have the power to influence change. We must use our platforms to lift each other up, not tear each other down." The conference made headlines, igniting discussions across the football community. Many praised Vinicius for his bravery, while others criticized him, accusing him of seeking attention. The mixed reactions only fueled his resolve. He received messages of support from various players and organizations, but he also faced relentless attacks from those who refused to accept his truth. As he delved deeper into activism, Vinicius teamed up with other players and organizations to create a campaign called Unity in Sport. The initiative aimed to promote awareness, education, and support for victims of racism. They organized community events, panel discussions, and workshops to engage fans, players, and families in meaningful dialogue. In one of the workshops, Vinicius found himself speaking alongside former players and influential figures in football. They shared their own experiences, creating a space for open discussion about racism in the sport. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, as players recounted the pain they had endured and the battles they had fought. "You are not alone in this fight," Vinicius told the attendees, his eyes scanning the crowd of young players eager to learn. "Together, we can change the narrative. It's not just about football, it's about humanity." As the campaign gained momentum, Vinicius felt the tide begin to shift. More players began to speak out, and clubs started implementing diversity programs. However, not everyone was on board. Some remained resistant, unwilling to accept the change. One particular match against a rival team became a flashpoint. As Vinicius stepped onto the pitch, he was greeted by a sea of hostility. The rival fans unfurled banners with derogatory messages aimed directly at him. It was a stark reminder of the ongoing battle he faced. But this time, Vinicius was prepared. He had been training not only physically, but mentally for moments like this. He channeled the energy of the hatred into his performance, determined to rise above it. As the match progressed, he scored a stunning goal, lifting the spirits of his teammates and fans. But instead of celebrating in anger, he turned to the stands, holding his arms wide open. It was a gesture of defiance, a refusal to be broken by their hate. After the match, Vinicius was interviewed by a local sports reporter. "You can't let hate define you," he said, his voice unwavering. "We must keep pushing forward and striving for equality. This fight is far from over, but we will not be silenced." Despite his efforts, the backlash continued. The institution behind the Best Player award remained stagnant, its leadership unwilling to address the growing concerns about racism in the sport. The upcoming awards ceremony loomed over him like a dark cloud. He had been the frontrunner for the prestigious title, but whispers of a potential boycott filled the air. Vinicius felt the tension rise as the date approached. He knew that winning the award would not erase the pain he had endured, but it would serve as a significant step forward. It would symbolize a shift in the narrative, a moment of recognition for all those who had suffered in silence. On the night of the awards ceremony, the atmosphere was electric. Vinicius arrived, dressed impeccably, but he could feel the weight of expectation on his shoulders. As he sat in the audience, surrounded by the best players in the world, he couldn't shake the feeling of impending disappointment. He had heard the murmurs and the rumors. It was becoming increasingly apparent that the award was not his to claim. When the time finally came to announce the winner, Vinicius held his breath. The presenter's voice echoed through the room as they announced the name of the winner, a white player who had not faced the same scrutiny or adversity. The cheers erupted from the audience, but for Vinicius, the moment felt hollow. He managed a polite smile, but deep down, he felt the sting of betrayal. As the event continued, he sat in silence, feeling the weight of what had just transpired. The award he had worked tirelessly for had slipped through his fingers, and the systemic racism that had plagued him for years reared its ugly head once more. But as he watched the winner accept the trophy, he resolved not to let this defeat define him. The battle against racism was ongoing, and though he hadn't won the individual accolade, he had achieved something far greater. Vinicius had become a voice for change, a beacon of hope for countless others fighting against injustice. And with that, he knew his journey was far from over. The aftermath of the awards ceremony weighed heavily on Vinicius. The disappointment of not receiving the coveted trophy felt like a personal loss, but he quickly reminded himself that the fight was not just about individual accolades. It was about something much bigger. As he returned to the training ground the next day, he was greeted with an outpouring of support from teammates and fans alike. Many had reached out to express their solidarity, reminding him that he was a champion in their eyes. The media frenzy that followed the ceremony amplified the conversation surrounding racism in football. Major outlets began to spotlight Vinicius' activism, focusing not only on his skill as a player, but also on his courage to speak out against injustice. He was invited to appear on talk shows and panel discussions, where he continued to advocate for change in the sport. During one particularly emotional interview, Vinicius spoke about his experiences with racism throughout his career. "I want to make it clear that this isn't just about me," he said passionately. "This is about every player, every fan, and every individual who has ever faced discrimination. We must stand together, hold those accountable who perpetuate hate, and strive for a future where everyone is treated with dignity." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord with viewers around the world. People began to share their own stories of racism and discrimination, igniting a movement that transcended the world of football. Support for Vinicius grew, with social media platforms flooded with hashtags promoting unity and equality. In the following weeks, the club's management took notice. The increased scrutiny from fans, media, and sponsors pushed them to take a stand. They organized a summit with players, coaches, and prominent figures in the sport to address the pressing issues of racism and discrimination. Vinicius was invited to lead the discussions, which was a testament to how far his voice had traveled. At the summit, Vinicius stood before an audience filled with club executives, players, and members of the press. He laid out a comprehensive plan to combat racism within the sport, focusing on education, support systems for victims, and community outreach programs. "We need to create a culture where everyone feels safe and respected," he asserted. "This isn't just about policies. It's about changing hearts and minds." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Clubs across the league began to implement similar initiatives, and players from different teams united in support of the cause. Vinicius' courage had sparked a movement, and the fight against racism in football was gaining momentum. But challenges remained. Rival teams and their supporters were resistant to change, often doubling down on their aggressive tactics. During a key match against one of his team's fiercest rivals, Vinicius experienced the hostility firsthand. As he stepped onto the pitch, he was met with a barrage of insults and derogatory chants. The atmosphere was charged, and for a moment, doubt crept into his mind. Yet, as the game began, he channeled the anger and pain into his performance. He played with an intensity that electrified the crowd. Every touch of the ball was a defiance against hate. When he scored a brilliant goal, the stadium erupted, His supporters celebrated while the opposing fans were momentarily silenced. Vinicius raised his hands high, not just in celebration, but as a symbol of resilience. In the locker room after the match, his teammates gathered around him. "You're more than just a player, Vinicius," one of them said, patting him on the back. "You're a leader. You inspire us all to fight back." The camaraderie in that moment was palpable, strengthening their resolve to continue the fight together. As the season continued, Vinicius became not just a top player, but a powerful ambassador for change in football. His performances on the pitch were stellar, leading his team to victory after victory, while his activism off the pitch gained momentum. He spoke at schools, attended community events, and collaborated with organizations working to eradicate racism. Finally, the day of the Champions League final arrived, a culmination of years of hard work and dedication. As he stepped onto the field, the weight of the moment hung in the air. This was not just a game. It was a chance to prove that perseverance could lead to victory. The opposing team was formidable, but Vinicius was determined. The match unfolded with high intensity, both teams fighting fiercely for the trophy. Vinicius was everywhere, showcasing his incredible skills and determination. As the clock wound down, the score was tied. With just minutes remaining, he received a pass from a teammate. He dribbled past defenders with elegance, each movement a declaration of defiance against the hate he had faced. In a moment of sheer brilliance, Vinicius struck the ball with precision, sending it soaring into the back of the net. The stadium erupted into a frenzy, fans from his team celebrating like never before. As he ran toward the corner flag, he knelt down, tears streaming down his face. This was a victory not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized, oppressed, or discriminated against. When the final whistle blew, the victory was sealed. Vinicius was named man of the match, but it was the trophy for the Champions League that mattered most. As he lifted it high above his head, he felt the weight of his journey, the struggles, the pain, and the fight for equality, collapse into a moment of pure joy. In the post-match interviews, he dedicated the victory to those who had supported him and those still fighting against racism. "This trophy represents more than just a win for our team," he said, his voice steady. "It symbolizes hope. We are stronger together, and we must continue to fight against hate." As the confetti rained down, Vinicius realized that while the fight was far from over, they had taken a monumental step forward. With unity, courage, and love, they would continue to challenge the darkness of racism. And with every goal he scored and every word he spoke, he would strive to create a world where every player, regardless of their race, could shine just as brightly.